Before we get into this special weekend edition of Just the Truth, let me tell you about the latest special from Mike Lindell at MyPillow. The standard MyPillow, normally $49.98 for a limited time only, just $14.88 with promo code Joey. Go to MyPillow.com, click on the radio listener specials, and see all the specials. There's a limited quantity of just 10 at this special price. That's $14.88 with promo code Joey. Thanks for joining me in the PhD Weight Loss Studio. To lose weight for the last time, visit myphdweightloss.com. Jeffrey K. Smith is a physician and an author here in the upstate of South Carolina. Having written over 20 books, Dr. Smith's Bringing History Alive series does just that. He has a way of making you feel like you're right there in the middle of the story. Joining us on our guest line today to talk about his latest book titled The 25-Day Vice President is Dr. Jeffrey K. Smith. Welcome. It's been a while. Too long, actually.
It has. Thank you, as always, for remembering me and giving me the opportunity to speak to your listeners.
Well, before we get into your latest book, and by the way, it's another great read, for our listeners who may not be familiar with your work, give us a quick overview of when you became interested in writing and how do you get the ideas for your books?
Okay. Well, I've always had I've always been a passionate reader, and I've always had great interest in writing, even though I pursued medicine as a career. I minored in English in college and came close to having a second minor in history. And I've been particularly interested in writing about history. I started out in the 1990s. I wrote 3 murder mystery novels. And then I shifted my focus to history and came up with the concept of bringing history alive. I think if you can present historical events, biographies in a format that reads like a novel, you can really engage people in history again and prove that fact is often more compelling than fiction is. And it's an opportunity to, I think, for readers to both be entertained and educated. I typically pick subjects that are sometimes lesser known people in history, or try to, if it's a more widely recognized person or event, to bring into play not only their life, but the times that surrounded them as well, to be able to just capture a moment in history, maybe even an era in history, and help readers better understand that and better appreciate where we were as a country, where we were as a world at that point in time, and how things have evolved over the course of American history.
Yeah. Well, you certainly do a great job of that. As I said, you make the books come alive. You feel like you're just living in that time. And I'll tell you, there's one other person who has a knack for that too. And I'm going to put you and Bill O'Reilly are my 2 favorite authors, because Bill O'Reilly has that knack as well in his series of books. And so it's a real gift. And every time I've ever read one of your books, I've always enjoyed it, and I don't want it to end. I want the story to continue. So let's talk about your latest, the 25-Day Vice President.
I became very interested in this. I'm by birthright Alabamian, by adoption a South Carolinian, having now lived in South Carolina longer than Alabama. So my interest in American history is wide-ranging, but it has been particularly captivated by events that occurred in my birth state and my adopted state. So many of my books have been about Alabamians and South Carolinians. And in the course of American history, only 22 out of the 50 states have actually produced vice presidents, and 16 of those came from 2 states, New York 11, Indiana 5. William Rufus Vane King is Alabama's only vice president. And outside of Alabama, when I was researching this book and I mentioned the name, there were very few people who had any idea who this person was. And even among longtime Alabamians, they had very little knowledge of him. And I think I found his life to be very interesting. And I also found it an opportunity to learn more. Basically, his political life began in 1807 and lasted until his death in 1852. And I think that particular era of history, pre-antebellum, early antebellum, is somewhat been neglected in the teaching of history. And I wanted to bring that era alive because there's so many interesting things that happened and transformational events that occurred during that time period.
Yeah. With me today, Dr. Jeffrey K. Smith, author of The 25-Day Vice President, and we're talking about his latest book. Mr. King was a very powerful man in his time. He was President pro tem of the U.S. Senate multiple times, which put him in the line of succession for the presidency, which actually was his ultimate goal, wasn't it, to be president?
Well, I think his ultimate goal was to be vice president, which is quite surprising when you look at political history. I think if he had a interest in being president, he never publicly stated that, though, as you mentioned a moment ago, on at least two occasions, he was a heartbeat away from the presidency at the times that President William Henry Harrison and President Zachary Taylor died. The president pro tem of the Senate was the third person in line to assume the presidency after the vice president. But he was a creature of the Senate. He loved being in that deliberative body. He loved being in an administrative role there. He was a master parliamentarian. He knew the rules inside and out in the Senate. And I think he enjoyed the congeniality of at that time of being in that deliberative body. If he truly wanted to be president, he never really said that or hinted at it. It seemed like his highest aspiration was to be vice president. And, off the top of my head, I can't think of another politician in history whose highest aspiration was to be vice president.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't quite figure that out because I couldn't decide if he was just the type of person who secretly wanted to become president, but he didn't want to reveal that. He wanted it to look as though he would be content with being vice president, which he ultimately was able to do that. The other thing I found interesting, too, was his service in the U.S. Senate was interrupted when he was appointed by Vice President John Tyler to be the American minister to France, yet he came back home and the people of Alabama sent him back to the Senate again.
Absolutely. He was quite popular in Alabama, even though he was a political anomaly for that time, a moderate Democrat in the South prior to the Civil War. And when I say moderate Democrat, he was a wealthy slaveholder. He believed that slavery was a constitutionally guaranteed right. But at the same time, he was anti-secessionist. He was not a fire-eating states' writer who believed that, at any point a state had the right to secede from the Union. And that placed him in kind of a unique position and sometimes an unpopular position, but yet he maintained a connection with enough key political leaders in Alabama to remain in the Senate for, essentially combined 29 years. And I say essential political leaders because At that time, U.S. senators were still elected by state legislatures, not by popular vote, which would not come until the early 20th century.
Right. With me today, Dr. Jeffrey Smith, a physician in the upstate of South Carolina, but a gifted author as well. He's the author of over 20 books. His Bringing History Alive series is just a wonderful series. Let me encourage you to go to your favorite bookseller. You can purchase his books on Amazon and look at some of Dr. Smith's works. I promise you, they're great reads. There was a lot of speculation about the relationship between William R. King and James Buchanan. Talk with us about that.
Yes, the one of the people who do recognize King's name, often the first comment they make to me, "Oh, he was James Buchanan's lover," and my response to that was that has been alleged, but one has to remember that in the 19th century, there were very few lawmakers who had the wealth in order to maintain residencies in their home states as well as Washington, D.C. So when Congress was in session, many congressmen and senators left their families behind when they came to Washington, D.C., and they typically lived together in boarding houses when they were what were referred to as messes. And typically messes were groups of lawmakers who lived in the same boarding house, typically had similar political beliefs. And at that time, there were no official offices for either senators or lawmakers on Capitol Hill. They had not built the wings yet. So the boarding house not only served as a place to eat and sleep, but it also was an unofficial office for lawmakers. And typically, after dinner in the evening, they would congregate in various living rooms and discuss politics and topics of the day. So Buchanan and King, both lifelong bachelors, struck up a friendship, and they spent a considerable number of years living in the same boarding houses, and they were frequent companions to social and political events, which in that era of history set tongues to wagging about what the true nature of their relationship was. And many people who have read about either King or Buchanan or researched it have kind of based their opinion about their sexual orientation on really a single letter that James Buchanan wrote during the time in which King went to France to be the U.S. minister to that European nation. And I think, at least in my opinion, have taken the wording of that letter very selectively and implied there was more to that relationship than perhaps there was. And there's certain words like wooing that in the 19th century was not a word used exclusively in romantic pursuits. That word wooing was often used when lawmakers were trying to garner support from fellow lawmakers for a particular piece of legislation they were pushing. So I think that letter has been given entirely too much significance as far as defining what their relationship was. Bottom line is no one really knows, and one has to realize at that time that sodomy was a punishable by life imprisonment. So it was nothing to be taken lightly if that were discovered and, proven in a court of law. So it's been one of the biggest controversies about their life. And I think that, unfortunately, that particular aspect has overshadowed so many of King's accomplishments. So I'm trying to address that issue in a very objective manner in the book, and then, ultimately, pose the question to readers at the end, does it really matter? Does that add or detract from William King's accomplishments based solely on his sexual orientation? And as you, I think, found towards the end of the book, I posed a question to readers. I said, well, we know that William R. King was a prosperous slaveholder who built his wealth based on the backs of slaves via human bondage. If we were to examine our own personal foibles, our own personal prejudices, who would we respect more now? Would we respect a heterosexual slave owner or a gay abolitionist? So I really want to challenge readers to think about that, and does that significantly shape the historical record?
Yep. Dr. Smith, in our final moment or so together, let's kind of wrap up the ending of this story. Of course, in November of 1852, Mr. King achieved his goal, was elected Franklin Pierce's vice president, but was very ill at the time. So tell us how this story ends.
Well, King, in all likelihood, contracted tuberculosis during his time as a foreign minister in France. Paris, in particular, was a hotbed of tubercular infections in that era in history. And people may not realize that tuberculosis in the 19th century was the same killer and debilitating illness that polio and AIDS became in the 20th century. In fact, King was so ill that he was really unable to participate in the 1852 election. And when he and Pierce were elected, soon after that, he was nearing the terminal phase of his illness. So he and one of his nieces traveled to Cuba, and there was very little doctors could do for tuberculosis in the pre-antibiotic era. And one of the popular destinations was to send patients to Cuba, where the tropical climate seemed to have a palliative effect, improve respiratory functioning. So he left in the early January of 1853, shortly after being elected vice president, and went to Cuba and remained there for approximately 3 months. Unfortunately, it did little to improve his condition. However, he was so ill that he was unable to return to Washington in March of 1853 to be for the formal inauguration. So Congress passed special legislation to allow him to be sworn into office in Cuba, and he remains the only president or vice president to have been sworn into office on foreign soil in American history. And as we got into early April, King was convinced he was dying and told his niece, "I want to die in my home." So he traveled by ship back to the port of Mobile, Alabama, and then took a smaller boat up the Alabama River to his plantation. And true to his word, he died one day after returning home.
Wow.
And so he is the shortest tenured vice president in the history of America. and also the only vice president that never had an opportunity to even return to Washington, D.C. and occupy his office.
Yeah. Wow. Thus, the 25-day vice president, the title of your latest book. Dr. Smith, always a pleasure. Appreciate your time today. And again, you can purchase the book at Amazon, and let me recommend that you do so. It's a great read. Always good to catch up with you. And hey, I look forward to the next one.
All right. Very good, Joey. Thank you again for having me.
That's it for this special weekend edition of Just the Truth. Thanks for joining me in the PhD Weight Loss Studios. To lose weight for the last time, visit myphdweightloss.com. If you haven't joined my mailing list yet, visit my website, joeyhudson.com. Click on the Connect with Joey button so that you can receive our emails and the most up-to-date news. Also, join me on my YouTube channel. Be sure and like, comment, and subscribe. Just search for Joey Hudson. As always, thanks for spending a few minutes of your day with me. Do me a favor and forward this episode to a few friends. Just click on the share button and send to your contacts. We need to build an army of conservatives to win our country back, and we can do that by continuing to share the truth with our friends and family. Keep those comments coming via the Furman Ford text line 864-477-JOEY. Email to joey@joeyhudson.com, and I love your messages on the MyPillow message line. Again, that's 864-477-JOEY, 864-477-5639. Be sure and take advantage of the MyPillow special, just $14.88 on the standard MyPillows when you use promo code Joey. Order online at mypillow.com or call 800-893-4053. We're back again tomorrow and hope you'll plan to join us. Until then, remember, God's got this. He's still in control.